All right, Dr. Shawn Baker, you're one of the most impressive athletes that I've known. I mean, you've got some serious rowing records. You also follow a strict carnivore diet, and I think it's a perfect way to talk about carnivore as well as being an athlete and how they can work hand in hand. But I also want to just talk athletics in general. So, I mean, first of all, tell everyone about your rowing records. I mean, you've got some pretty impressive stuff there.
You've got to check out this PEMF mat. So this pulse electromagnetic field mat from Bond Charge. So if you've seen me talk about the sauna blankets before, this biohacking company has come out with this super cool mat. So this mat uses like grounding technology, and it uses all kinds of different waves. So it can send delta waves through your body, it can send alpha waves, beta waves to change sort of your state and help you relax. It's really cool stuff. So if you're trying to improve your sleep, trying to improve your mood, trying to calm your central nervous system, it really is a game changer for that. Like, I laid on it the first time, and within 15 minutes, I felt like my state had completely shifted. I was much more relaxed, but they're also using red light therapy, and they're also using infrared as well. So you're getting infrared heat, so you get this like relaxing effect when you lay on it. You're also getting 660 red light therapy as well, so you're getting the red light effect, but then you have 5 different settings for different PEMF settings. And what that means is you're basically sending small amounts of delta waves or small amounts of specific grounding waves to kind of change your body's feeling and how you feel. It's pretty cool. So you use it for like 10, 15 minutes per day, and you just do it when you're meditating, you do it when you're doing breath work or anything like that. They deliver super, super fast, like worldwide shipping anywhere, and that link down below saves you some serious cashola. So that is a discount link down below using that code and that link. So after today's video, if you want to try something that's going to change how you feel pretty darn quick, at least in my opinion, check out Bond Charge's PEMF mat down below.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is all on Concept 2. So Concept 2 is a rowing machine that Olympic athletes use, college rowing teams use. This is something that they have been competing on for about 40 years, and so it's well, you have the Concept 2 here. So I set let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 world records on that, and various differences, and 6 American records, I think 6 or 7 American records now. So I started doing that when I was in my late 40s rather, and I was doing pretty good. I was able to break an age at 49. I broke the American record for the 40 plus category. So I was about to age out at 50, but at 49 I broke the American record. But then I went carnivore just before I turned 50, and then 6 months later, I was able just to smash everything. I was hitting PRs, and so now, again, at 57, I'm trying to break some of the 55 plus records. I just found out they allow 55, because it used to be every 10 years, and they switched it to every 5. So I was like, well, hell, I can go break some of those records. But yeah, I've been rowing for off and on for about a dozen years, and so that's, as you know, can be metabolically challenging. It's particularly when you're doing it a lot 500 or something like that. That really requires a tremendous amount of strength, cardiovascular fitness, to be honest, and obviously technique's important. But I mean, that was after powerlifting. I did that for years. I played high level professional rugby. I was a world champion in Highland Games, which is putting the kilt on and throwing shot putting and throwing weights and stuff like that. So I've had some different fun things throughout the years. But I was very fortunate to be able to either win world championships or set world records in now 3 different sports. So that's been kind of interesting. And
you've done so all doing different diets too, right? I mean, I'm assuming when you were playing rugby, you were young, and probably diet looked completely different. But it's interesting. Have you noticed any specific differences between diets as far as athletic performance is concerned?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess the caveat is I've been on a carnivore diet for the last, basically 8 years. And what I've noticed with regard to that is I have what I feel is better recovery. I have less, I guess, inflammation and soreness. Again, there's a difference between being a master's athlete and being a 20-year-old where you don't have any mileage on you yet. So I think there's some clear differences there. And so what I find is, as you pointed out, when I was playing rugby, I was eating carbohydrates. When I was doing, Highland Games, I was consuming carbohydrates. But actually later in my Highland Games, I started to switch over to a ketogenic diet. So I was starting to become low carb at that point. So that's when my transition started to occur. But what I find is that over the course of a year or 6 months, or whatever training block training period you want to look at. I find that by being carnivore, I have less days that I have to miss for training due to sore joints, poor sleep, motivational issues. So I like you, I train just about every day. I mean, every day I want to train, and I think that's, less and less common, particularly for older and older athletes. I mean, older people in general just have so many aches and pains where it's not enjoyable to train. But I still enjoy a lot of it. I think it's very much just a part of who I am. It's like breathing at this point. If I'm not training, I don't feel particularly good. So it's been, I've been lifting weights for 45 years. I mean, it's been a long time. Yeah.
Now, a 500-meter row, that is a largely glycolytic event. I mean, so there's going to be people out there that aren't familiar with any low carb approach, whether it's carnivore, keto, there's you need carbohydrates to fuel. Clearly, you're not having carbohydrates to fuel in that case. So hopefully you can maybe enlighten the listeners a little bit on how that works, maybe with gluconeogenesis a little bit. But also, curious, before we go there, do you do that fasted or do you feed beforehand? And in a low carb state or carnivore state, does that really matter?
Yeah, interesting. I've done it both. I've done it fast. In fact, when I set the 500-meter world record when I turned 50, it was 1:14.5. And just to put that in perspective, like Brian Shaw, world's strongest man, rose about a 1:14.5 about the same time as him, and he's 6'8", 430 pounds or something like that. Jason Khalipa, the CrossFit champ, rode like 1:19. Mm-hmm. And so I'm at 50 years of age running, throwing out a 1:14. Olympic champion gold medal rowers row in the low one, upper 1:10. So I'm, faster than all those guys. Now, granted, Olympic rowers are training for a different distance, 2,000 meters typically, but it's a very difficult thing to do at any age. And, to do it at 50, I was pretty pleased about that. But as far as, energy systems, obviously we got the creatine phosphate system, the ATP, that's your pure sprint. This is 100-meter dash, you've got 10 seconds basically of that type of fuel. And then you switch over to this anaerobic glycolysis where you're just burning through muscle glycogen, and then for the longer stuff you're getting into the aerobic type of stuff. But I mean, clearly glucose is involved at that high intensity. When I'm going all out, that's clear. And like I said, we have more information now. Like we talked about athletes wearing CGMs showing that their blood glucose is shooting up over 200. And in fact, when I tied the American record the other day, my blood glucose was 200. So I clearly have access to glucose for those really, really high demand sports, even though I don't consume carbohydrates, because as we know, gluconeogenesis and then subsequent hepatic glycogenolysis is occurring at that rapid response to dump glucose into my bloodstream. So I have access to that. We know that the liver can 15-fold increase its glucose output, and probably more in a well-trained athlete. I mean, that's clearly known. So we have these capacities to do that. So I think as long as I'm consuming adequate amounts of protein and the training, like I said, we talked about kind of off camera earlier, if you're training CrossFit and you're doing 2, 3, 4 WODs a day, or you're training for an Olympic level marathon, probably carnivore is not going to be the ideal approach. But for what 99.9% of the population does as an athlete, I think you can have adequate, if not extremely good performance, in a low carb state.
So since, gluconeogenesis is, demand driven, not supply driven, can you effectively replenish 300 grams of carbohydrates by just increasing your fat and protein intake? Because, you're going to replenish glycogen through the glycerol backbone as well, right?
Yeah. So glycerol, of course there's lactate reshuttling as well. This goes on. So, I think there was a study came out, 2019-ish, looking at particularly endurance athletes and low-carb endurance athletes. And what they found out is they have a higher protein demand, because, when you're chronically pounding, you're breaking down muscle tissue, and so you have this higher protein turnover anyway. But we see that in both animal studies and human studies, if protein is adequate, then you can pretty reliably refill glycogen stores. And again, some of the newer data seems to indicate that it may not be glycogen so much as blood glucose, which is the determining factor for higher performance at some of these, sort of intense levels.
That's really interesting. Have you noticed anything as far as delayed onset muscle soreness with carnivore versus not?
Yeah, I again, this is obviously my observation, anecdotal. I seem not to be as sore as much as I was, when I used to, because I've done some really, really challenging workouts. So, you go in and you pick 135 and squat it for 100 reps. That's a tough workout. I mean, you're going to be sore with that. But I've done that over the years. And I remember when I did that on carbohydrates, I literally couldn't walk for like 2 or 3 days afterwards. And I've done that in a carnivore state, and you're sore, but not as bad. So I think the DOMS, the late onset muscle soreness, is attenuated somewhat for sure.
Yeah.
So like I said, the workout we did today was, it's not that bad. I mean, it was a decent workout, but I could certainly do it tomorrow and the next day and the next day without any challenge at all.
Is that a low key kind of like challenge?
No. I mean, I'm just saying, it was a good workout, but I'm just saying it wasn't like we were puking at the end or anything like that, right?
Yeah. No. We could have gone there if you wanted to, but
yeah. I've done that before. I haven't done it in a while. It's been a few years I've done that. So you could do.
It's the benefit of training fast.
Well, I think we could do Wingate protocols on the Airdyne.
Yeah,
that would be a fun one.
It would be fun. I've noticed with the DOMs, I've actually noticed the same thing. There's a little bit of a trade-off that I've noticed. So part of the reason why when I was increasing my training volume, I started adding some carbohydrates in was predominantly because my sleep was going south, probably just because I was frying my CNS so much. And I think maybe the little bit of a insulin blunting, kind of the cortisol effect for me, kind of would calm me down to the point where I could actually sleep, especially when I was doing 2-a-days. But what I noticed was there's this trade-off. It's like I was sleeping better, but the DOMS was so bad that my actual frequency of workouts and number of reps I could get in a given week is actually more when I'm ketogenic than when I'm fueled by carbs. So when I have carbs in the mix, I wouldn't say there's a noticeable increase in my strength. Like it's not huge. There's a noticeable increase in my systemic sort of recovery. Like I feel more rested, but I'm more sore. So there's always these trade-offs. So for me, it's finding that balance. Interestingly enough, I'm curious your take on this because I've actually found, and I have to kind of go back on things I even said a few years ago with my endurance work. I've always thought that, keto lends itself quite well to endurance training. And it does from like a beta oxidation standpoint and that whole piece. But I find that where the carbohydrates have improved my performance is mainly on the endurance work. If anything, they've actually taken away a little bit from my my resistance training, and it's almost ass backwards sounding. I don't know if you have an explanation for that, or if it's just a bio-individual thing. I'm curious your take on that.
Yeah, well, obviously, if we look in the carbohydrate literature, I mean, obviously, you look at endurance athletes and what are they consuming? They talk about how many grams of carbohydrates they need per hour of performance. And again, when you start getting into those longer and longer time frames, I do think it's harder to. I mean, there's going to be a point when your hepatic glycogen reserves are going to be, starting to run low. Your blood glucose is going to low. And so I think, that's when you're going to see like if I'm wearing a CGM. If I see it start to drop off, this is going to be after several hours of exercise and walking and that type of stuff. And so I think gluconeogenesis, like you mentioned, is it supply or demand driven? I think it's perhaps a little of both. Is not a fast thing. It doesn't happen. Like when I consume a steak, gluconeogenesis is not happening in 30 minutes like when I consume carbohydrates. They break down and my bloodstream is replete with glucose. This is going to be something that's going to take, probably 4 hours just to get the food out of your stomach so it can start to be absorbed, right? And then the liver has to do what it's going to do with that. So it's a much more delayed phenomenon. So I think, if you're relatively fasted, you're gonna run into issues chronically with endurance more than I think for the short burst stuff. And I think that at what level I'm training VO2 max wise, strength training, you're not tapping into your VO2 max very hard. I mean, maybe you can argue a high rep set of squats, you're breathing pretty hard, but it's not like going running hardcore sprints over and over again. It's a different energy system for sure.
Yeah, no, I've definitely noticed that, and it's. Definitely doesn't seem to impact me, top level strength, anything like that. The only time I might notice it, and I've even noticed being very low carb that I mean, you're tapping into the CP system in those first 1 to 3 reps anyway. So, I mean, it's like that number never changed. It's, my max deadlift, max bench, max squat never changed from the time I was heavily carb fueled to being, low carb ketogenic.
Yeah, so probably just body weight was the only thing that affects that.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. So with the carnivore diet being sort of an inflammatory modulator in a way, like you've got all these ketone effects for reducing inflammation or modulating inflammation, at least, not to mention whatever, elimination is occurring. There's some talk in some of the keto communities that the inhibition of like the NLRP3 inflammasome might actually inhibit recovery from, say, strength training, like the actual inflammatory response that you need directly after a workout. Do you think there's any meaningful, is it a meaningful amount, or is it such a negligible decrease in inflammation that it's not going to inhibit recovery in that sense?
Yeah, well, I think the honest answer, we probably just don't know the answer. I mean, it's kind of like, we see with like cold plunging after a workout, it decreases that exercise-induced inflammation, which may inhibit, muscle protein synthesis. Obviously, again, we talk about the nuance on when is inflammation bad, when is it good. We work out, we get inflammation, and then supposedly that leads to a positive effect. I mean, the answer is we just don't know. And are we going to study that? Probably not. I'm looking at all the studies we can do on carnivore. That one's going to be
pretty low.
A long ways to go before we can get to that sort of information. So, again, anecdotally, I know my own personal experience. I'm as strong as we were talking off camera. I'm as strong at 57, as strong as I've been since I've been probably 42. And at 42, I was declining. I clearly saw I was getting weaker. I didn't feel like training as much. And now, nearly 8 years into a carnivore diet, I'm stronger than I was in my mid 40s, which is pretty cool. So I'm doing that in the absence of carbs, and I think with less inflammation. So there's probably, like everything, there's nuance. Where is the inflammation problematic? What is there's so many different mechanisms going into this.
So as an athlete, and obviously you're lifetime drug free, but are there any supplements that you take at all, or are you straight up just meat is the answer?
Now I don't really take anything outside of an electrolyte. Take an electrolyte, when you're sweating, you lose a lot of that stuff. But over the years, protein powders, creatine, chromium piconolate back. I don't know if you remember that stuff from back in the, seems like the 1980s or something like that. It's interesting. I think all the supplements that have shown realistic, decent data, creatine, maybe carnitine, something like those are like animal products anyway.
Taurine,
taurine. So maybe caffeine might be one that some people get some benefit to, but I consume so much meat that I probably get all the real effective supplements. And again, I don't take drugs or anything like that. So those clearly work for people. There's no doubt about that. But I just don't have an interest in that.
So do you regularly train fasted in that case, or is it kind of just up in the air whatever works for you?
So again, if we look at this blood glucose model, saying blood, so it's kind of interesting. I did in 2018 when I won the rowing world championships. It was in Long Beach, so it was like convenient. This year it was like in, I don't know, Slovakia or something. I just wasn't going to go there to do that, or Czechoslovakia, I think. So this year, so in 2018 it was in Long Beach, and I knew like what happens when you consume carbs. Blood glucose spikes in about 30, 45 minutes, something like that, right? We've had countless people with CGM show us that. But protein and fat, particularly protein, you might not see that spike for like 3 or 4 hours. And so when I did that particular competition, I remember I cooked literally a 3-pound tomahawk steak at my house in Laguna Hills. I ate it at like, 9 a.m. and then I drove down to Long Beach like 3 hours later when I was getting ready to compete, and my blood glucose probably was at its peak. And I ended up winning the world championship in that. So I think there's, for certain performance, but I do a lot of fasting. Like I'm fasted today. When we trained today, I was fasted. I had steak last night for dinner, but and I probably won't eat again until tonight, I imagine. But I think for like absolute peak performance, I might prefer a little food, sometime proximate to before I train. But day to day, fasted's fine for me. I can train pretty darn hard that way.
Yeah, it's kind of the same way I've been. I feel like metabolically, there's not a huge need to be eating right before. I think sometimes psychologically, or maybe there's a signal somewhere, like we're fueled, we can push it a little bit harder, but I certainly don't feel that.
I remember years ago, like I used to feel like I could bench more when I had a full stomach. It was just like, maybe it was just, a distance
a leverage thing.
A leverage thing, perhaps. I remember I'd eat a big meal and I go bench and I'd have it. I never had a great bench, but I was stronger when I could do that.
Yeah. Well, Shawn, where can everyone find you, man?
So Instagram, Shawn Baker, 1967. So SHAWN, Baker, 1967. Twitter or X, SBakerMD. YouTube and TikTok, Shawn Baker MD. Rivero.com and Carnivore.diet.
Perfect. Well, thanks, my man.
Perfect. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.